What's going on, Los Angeles, LAFB fam, Bruin Nation? The Thrill and Madman back in your living rooms, coming up with all things UCLA football. We got lots to discuss in terms of more portal reinforcements, a discussion about the spring showcase, and then, of course, what's to come. But first and foremost, my brother from another mother, fresh off of back-to-back emphatic playoff road victories for his Golden State Warriors, Mr. Will the Thrill Decker. Thriller, how we feeling about life, about your Warriors, and just everything in general?
Well, just be happy to be playing another game, I think, is the biggest thing there. But we're worried about this Curry injury. No joke about it. But, unfortunately, it's going to be Nico Harrison that's the prophet here. Defense wins championships, as he said after the AD trade. He might be right. Let's get Jimmy, let's get Draymond out there making plays, and, hopefully the Warriors can keep it together. 1-0 is a big time start. So let's see what we can do in the long run of the series and maybe get Curry back healthy. So let's see, buddy.
1-0 is a big time start indeed. And Thriller, on behalf of Los Angeles Lakers fans everywhere, the reference to Nico Harrison, #too soon, it's after the 5-game defeat that the Los Angeles Lakers had at the hands of Anthony Edwards and Minnesota. But will we digress to teams that we're actually optimistic about in Los Angeles, and that is the Bruins of UCLA. Another big last couple of days. We'll start kind of on the personnel front here. A few major reinforcements coming UCLA's way, 2 in the form of defensive line, 1 in the form of tight end, and then 1 in the form of punter. And we'll start with the defensive line here, Will. The first defensive lineman, Keyshawn Bennett, comes over from Michigan. This is an individual who spent 4 years at Michigan, including being part of that national championship team. Keyshawn Bennett, although was seldom used, 7 career tackles, 1 tackle for loss over 4 seasons with Michigan. But Will, this is an individual that was the number 43 ranked defensive lineman in his class, in the class of 2021. He was recruited at that time by the likes of Penn State, by the likes of Miami, by the likes of Notre Dame and Nebraska and Ole Miss. So this is a very credible interior defensive lineman here that now provides reinforcement with the Gary Smiths, with the Keanu Williams, in a situation that the Bruins kind of desperately needed to beef up that defensive line. And joining Keyshawn Bennett, his defensive edge, Anthony Woods from Michigan State, the Spartans.
Jones.
And this is now going to be Anthony Woods' 4th team, Will, over the course of his career. It was Michigan State, it was Oregon, it was Indiana. He comes in 6'4", 260, really good body, 2 years of eligibility left, 38 career tackles, 2 sacks, and now he potentially will get paired with Nico DeVilliers on those 2 edges as Jacob Busage departs. So, Will, over to you. Your thoughts on Bennett and Jones coming in as reinforcements for this much-needed front 7, and in particular this defensive line that we've been talking about for so many weeks.
I've got a couple different angles adding the likes of a Jones and a Bennett with the D-line. We mentioned in our first initial impressions of spring, the D-line is what needed to improve. And you're adding a couple bodies there. We needed edge depth desperately. Busage was a guy that, he was solid against the run. I think he was lacking that top-tier athleticism to get to the quarterback that would really allow UCLA's defense to play in the manner they want with Elkaika Malloy there. And yes, Bennett, he only has 3 or 4 tackles throughout his entire career, but there is a preface there. He was playing behind some of the most talented defensive lines in the entire country. Who did we see get drafted this past year? Kenneth Grant went in the first round. Mason Graham went in the first round. Josiah Stewart wasn't far behind them in the third. And he's been there since 2021. So he was there with, the likes of Aiden Hutchinson and some of these other big standout pass rushers. I do have a preface with this, though, because we thought we were adding something similar with Michael Carmody last year, if you remember the offensive line from Notre Dame. So lack of production, we mentioned that he had just kind of waited his turn, bided his time at Notre Dame. And he was going to come in and help us a lot at UCLA. Ultimately, we never got to see Carmody on the football field. And it didn't add up where he was at. So let's temper our expectations. I think when we see Michigan and we see a transfer player, we're expecting to get an impact player. I'm kind of on the wait and see. He's been there since 2021. He's had 4 tackles. I'm not saying he can't make that jump with this great opportunity, but my expectations are going to be relatively lower than I think a lot of other people when it comes to Bennett. Jones, to me, is the most upside of all of these different transfers. When you look at where he initially started his career, he was a commitment to Oregon out of high school. Had offers from Oregon, Texas, USC, big name brand schools when it came to Anthony Jones. And when you think about Michigan State, you think of that rugged, gritty, tough defenses. And Jones, for me, is a guy that I think, 2 sacks last year is clearly on the upswing here. If he can kind of get to a spot where he's the number 1 edge rusher in a defense, and we really allow him to use that big frame, 6'4", 260, that's an NFL-sized frame. Can he be coached up by Malloy, who famously was able to revive Liatu Latu's career a couple of years ago and make him the edge rusher? That was the first defensive player picked in the NFL draft just a year ago. So Anthony Jones, that's the project I'm going to keep my eyes on. I think that's the most interesting project this team has coming into next season on the defensive line. The tight end, Jake Renda, I mean, just another body to add there. And I think what this tells to me, Madman, is Habermill is still recovering from that injury. They're looking for more depth at that position. Jack Peterson's more of your H-back type of tight end, where he's not the same game breaker, big body. You line him up in the 12-man personnel, he's going to block on the outside. Renda provides that. He's very similar to Bennett, where he's been in college for a lot of years, 2 catches, 14 yards in his career. But just adding another body there, I think, was very crucial to what Deshaun Foster wanted to do. And underrated. Maybe we come back to bite this back, but Carroll, the Aussie, coming from Tulane, this guy averaged a booming about, I think it was 43.5 yards per punt last year. That would rank in the top 30, 35 punters in the nation, coming into this season in terms of returning talent. So what I've really liked about UCLA, which I felt has been a deficiency dating back to that last chip year, our special teams were among the worst in the country. Remember, we couldn't make a field goal. We got Yankoff taking kicks. It was as bad as it got. And 2 years later, we're sitting here. We have a strategy with special teams. Roderick Pleasant coming in, I think it has to be one of the favorites to take those kickoff and punt returning, situations where this guy was the fastest 100-meter in the state of California. You got to put that guy back to take some kicks. And you're getting a punter back there with Mateen Bagani, the Bugatti Bagani, coming back for UCLA, one of our favorites, the guy who sparked the win against Iowa at home last year. Special teams is looking brighter. It's a consistent tip of the cap back to Deshaun and how hard he's recruiting. If you would have asked me 4 or 5 months ago who would have the better transfer portal class, UCLA or USC, I don't know if I would have picked us, but UCLA has been turning up the volume right now. And we're among the top 2 to 3 teams in the country when it comes to the portal. So hats off to Deshaun. Hats off to Coach Meat and his 8 defensive backs. Hats off to this organization that they're kind of laying out there. UCLA is on top of it, man.
No, for sure, Will. A couple things that you said there on going back to kind of Bennett and Jones to start. I agree with you. We have to sort of temper our expectations with Bennett. He comes with an interesting yet unproven resume. To your point, a lot of great tutelage there. When you think about Hutchison and Stewart and Graham and kind of absorbing a championship culture when you look at what Michigan did a couple of years ago to win the national title. And I think what you like about Bennett is you're just hoping for him to be a rotational piece on that interior defensive line. And the fact that he's coming from such a big-time program and a fellow Big Ten school, I think is very critical because he understands the physicality that it takes, understands kind of the technique and the style of this particular conference. So I think Bennett coming in as a potential rotational piece, whereas in years past, UCLA has had to rely on non-power 4 guys making the jump. You and I both love Busic, but that was a big jump. We had some other guys coming from, some FCS programs trying to make the jump. And that's always a steeper learning curve than somebody like a Bennett. And then when you look at Jones, Will, I think you said it really well. fourth big-time program here. I mean, if you're good enough to sort of play at Michigan State, given their style, play at Oregon, play at Indiana during Indiana's renaissance, you got something. I don't think Jones really found his way at any of those particular schools, a logjam at edge those particular years. But at 6'4", 260, you can't teach that. And, now you're getting two edges, both of whom unproven projects, both with a lot of physicality. But de Villiers coming from Arkansas and Jones coming from Michigan State, you're getting big-time programs, and that, I think, is what's exciting. Again, you got to hit here. It's unproven guys, but you're banking on guys that have come from big-time places, have that pedigree, and now can Ikaika Malloy kind of coach them up. So really exciting stuff there, Will. And what I like is it's sort of a direct need. We've been talking defensive line. That's the one Achilles heel right now of this team when you look at sort of the larger landscape of the roster, and Deshaun Foster just hitting that and hitting it hard. And then when you talk about tight end, I totally agree with you. Again, kind of an unproven body. We don't know what Habermill is going to be this year after the injury. Look, Habermill and Matavao, that was a battle, Will, back in 23. And we saw what ended up happening with Matavao getting drafted. So Habermill has a lot of talent if he's healthy. You recall that game against Washington, that famous DTR game that really kind of put that season on the map there. You look at some other things going on with Habermill. He had a really good showing against USC the year before with a couple of touchdowns. So, in the Coliseum. So, you're looking at Habermill as someone who's ready to make the jump. But just in case he can't, having, again, a power 4 tight end come in and potentially get those reps, I think is really, really solid. And then Carroll, I mean, you mentioned it. Will, I think what's interesting with the Big Ten, it's such a field position conference. And, fewer possessions, slower pace of play than where UCLA has come from in the Pac-12. You have to play with great special teams. You think of a team like a Minnesota. You think of a team like Wisconsin. You think of a team like Iowa. You think of a team even like Michigan State. That line between 6, 7, 8, 9 wins, it really ultimately comes down to special teams. And now if you got a booming punter and Carroll that can kind of flip the field and really kind of set up that defense to be more successful, even if you're light in the trenches, and then you got Bagani hitting those kicks, you're going to stay in the game. You're going to stay, on the road, keep it a possession, keep it a 4-point game. These are the kinds of things that allow you to chip away and ultimately get, to pay dirt. So I think really nice additions, some diamonds in the rough here, and really fortifying this roster moving forward. Will, I'll segue a little bit now to Spring Showcase. Yes. And, obviously we had it this past weekend. It's the culmination of the spring season. You and I were out there a couple of times. The Spring Showcase is always an interesting experience because it's not really a game. There's sometimes, these individual matchups. Sometimes you go kind of 6-on-6, 7-on-7. But oftentimes you're sort of looking for individual players matchups. Last year, famously, we saw Rico Flores just sort of break out in that game. We saw some of the defensive backs play really well. We saw Luke Duncan play really well. So there were guys that really emerged in last year's Spring Showcase. I would want to get your impressions, Will, of the Spring Showcase, what you saw, what you liked, and then what's kind of now your takeaway with this team coming off of the spring season now as we get into that true off season of sort of May, June, and July before things ramp back up again in August.
Yeah, I think the biggest things I took were, a couple on the field plays, but mostly the post-game, if you will, comment from Deshaun Foster. And let's start with it. He is very pleased right now with how the offensive line is gelling under Andy Kwan, and they added, 3 or 4 new bodies in the offseason, whether it's Brooks, whether it's Armella, these type of guys coming in from big-time programs that can help UCLA. We've talked about it, man. If last year's offensive line was fine, this team 7-8 wins, I think pretty easily. If that offensive line is right with a Deshaun Foster-led team, we know the run game is going to be open, and then Tino Sinceri can kind of get the X's and O's right and let this offense hum in the true fashion that we believe it can. So that was very encouraging to hear that he thinks the offensive line has been looking good. Granted, we've talked about the weakness of the team right now is the front four on the defensive side of the football. So if the offensive line can gel, that's very, very big. So I'm hyped about that. When you look at the people that stood out in the spring game, at least offensively, the two players that scored multiple touchdowns, we were worried about the running back depth before Javen Thomas came from UCLA. Carson Cox coming in, multiple touchdowns.
Yep.
This kid's a true freshman. He enrolled early, so he should still be at like his high school prom probably this weekend or next. He's getting 2 touchdowns in a spring football game. We love what Carson Cox is bringing to the table, and just further proved to me that this running back room, even with the addition of Javian Thomas, where, I thought the ceiling was raised a little bit higher. If you can get something out of Carson Cox, a true freshman making plays. The other big one was Mikey Matthews, man. We talked about it. We need that extra, move the chains. It's 3rd and 6. You need 8 yards. Give it to Mikey Matthews. He scored 2 touchdowns. So maybe he's got a little bit more under the top of the hood than we think he might have in terms of the Jets and getting open in red zone scenarios. Multiple touchdowns in a spring game is a big, big deal. And then, this might be my biggest takeaway. Luke Duncan staying at UCLA, making plays. He's been the darling of this podcast for 2 years. We loved him last year in spring football. We watched him in spring football this year. We thought, Joey Aguilar is going to Tennessee, and all signs point to him starting at Tennessee right now. We were kind of like, it's an open competition, guys. Luke Duncan is going to fight tooth and nail for this competition. And I've referenced who most resembles the Curtis Rourke style of, play on this UCLA team that they could just, pick and pull and put into the starting lineup. It was Luke Duncan. So while Nico's coming in and he will be the starting quarterback against Utah if healthy, no questions asked. But that competition between him and Madden the next year, when Nico, either goes to the NFL or he goes a different place, given the trajectory of where he's been at, Luke Duncan is a guy to keep an eye on again. And I'm just fired up for the kid because a lot of times you could leave, but if you stay and, get the course, like very similar to what Ethan Garbers did, where he kind of stayed the course and, it didn't end perfectly, but he got us a bowl win and a win over USC. That's pretty damn good. I think Luke Duncan could do some similar stuff if he's willing to stay the course with UCLA football, Madman.
No, great stuff there, Will. So much to unpack. I love all the points. I think we'll start with the first one, Will. I love, obviously Carson Cox really balled out. Fascinating running back room, isn't it, Will? When you look at Thomas, when you look at Woods, you look at Berger, you look at Cox, you look at Frias. I think presumably kind of conventional wisdom says, hey, maybe Berger's got the inside track a little bit, given, he was here last year. I think Thomas, everyone's super pumped about as well from the transfer from Cal. Those two seem like they're in the lead right now, but Cox and others are saying, hey, don't forget about us. And I think both Thomas as well as Berger, they're going to have to earn it. This might be the feistiest running back competition, Will, that we have seen in quite some time. I think we may have to sort of go back to sort of early year 1, year 2 Chip Kelly days before he got Kelly to come in terms of just how feisty the competition could potentially be. But you've got 4 or 5 guys that could legitimately win this job. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how they evolve in these next 90 days going into August. What do they add to their repertoire? Whether, from the weight room perspective, is it a little bit of quickness? Do they gain weight? Do they lose weight? I think so much now of the offseason conditioning and what they do from a regimen standpoint is going to come down to who ultimately kind of gets that job. I still believe it's sort of Thomas and Berger's to sort of lose in this sort of thunder and lightning. But as they say, objects in the rearview mirror are closer than they appear, and Cox certainly balled out in a very significant way. In terms of the receivers, Will, Mikey Matthews, you talk about that prototypical slot with the twitch and the burst. And in many ways, we love TMA so much on this show. If there was a Mount Rushmore of this particular show, it feels like TMA would be, take up multiple slots.
Shout out the Timalala family as well.
Absolutely. We love the family. Great supporters of UCLA and the show. We just think the world of them. And I think one of the things that made TMA so special is the chemistry that he had with Garbers. And it's going to be interesting to see, Will, who Nico gravitates towards, right, in terms of chemistry. TMA kind of had that incumbent chemistry. Mikey Matthews balled out, but let's not forget he balled out without the starting quarterback in the spring showcase, right? So he's looking great, but that chemistry with Nico is going to be critical. And then you got to believe Gilmer is ready to sort of make that jump. So based on kind of what we saw last year with Nico at Tennessee, it feels like he likes to throw the deep ball. And so, you got to love kind of where Gilmer lines up. And he also kind of likes these big targets in the slot. And so even though Mikey Matthews is a smaller guy, the fact that he's slot and he's got the quickness, he potentially could really position himself quite nicely, Will, to be an Iamaleava favorite, particularly when you think about how Tino Sunseri's offense is predicated on getting the ball out quickly, moving the chains, and avoiding the negative play. All of those things kind of scream Mikey Matthews in a very significant way. Anything you wanted to add there?
Man, when you mentioned the deep ball and how that could affect this offense, doesn't it make you sick that J. Mike Sturdivant is not on this roster this year? Doesn't it?
I was in a good mood. Okay, we were having a great conversation, and you got to go there. I mean, my God. I mean, Will,
if you
I'm telling you,
with J. Mike and just the offensive line providing a little bit more time, we have these what ifs every few years with UCLA football. Just what if the 2022 offense aligned with the 2023 defense? What if J. Mike came back? What if Rosen hit his ceiling? We had these constant questions with UCLA football. But if Sturdy was with Nico in this current iteration, oh, man.
It'd be a game changer, Will, because particularly even when you look at Nico, that he loves that big receiver, that big, long receiver. It's Sturdy. When you look at Indiana's top two receivers last year, it was bigger guys, 6'4", 6'5" guys. I mean, it really was that perfect system. I think Sturdy's going to ball out in the SEC this year, have a big-time sort of draft position, and we'll always say, we always had, those few years. It's sort of a relationship, when you sort of go in separate directions, you sort of look fondly on that it happened. But we digress, Will. We digress. I think that Mikey Matthews is going to be a really critical piece. Gilmer is going to be a critical piece. Yeah. And let's not sleep on Jaden Wilson and his top-end speed, particularly with the way Iamaleava likes to air it out. I see these four, Will, as really emerging from the pack as sort of our primary receivers. And then you never know about Connor Shaw. Even we talked to Wayne a lot about this offline. He keeps talking about Connor Shaw, the things that he's seeing, behind the scenes. He's long, he's athletic, he's fast. It's just a matter of that durability play. So Connor Shaw could be another one that could make some very significant plays given this Sunseri system and given the Iamaleava style. And so I think lots to be excited about there.
Yeah, and you remember Shaw, he was playing week 1 against Hawaii last year. He was getting time with
getting reverses. I mean, incredible touches.
We had Loya here last year. We had Sturdy. We had Quasi, who was a can't-miss prospect for us. Habermill wasn't there, but Mataval was. We had a lot of options, and the fact that he was still getting playing time and targets, that says everything you need to know about Carter Shaw. So, he has a real chance of being great for this team if we can get him out there a little bit more.
No question, Will. And to your last point about Luke Duncan, what I love so much about Duncan, in addition to all of the physical skills, the size, just the beautiful mechanics with the ball, the way he fits into what Tino Sunseri believes a quarterback should be. I think he's got to get a little bit quicker with the feet and kind of the pace of play, but that all comes with time and maturity. But what I love what Luke Duncan represents, just that competitiveness and that willingness to stick it out and compete against Madden in particular down the line. But to me, Will, it tells me that the health of the program is in a great spot, because the most elite programs and the healthiest of programs in the country are always kind of 3 deep at quarter. They have a plan. It's not just their current quarterback and it's not just their next quarterback, they have a very clear vision who their quarterback after next is going to be. And when you look at where UCLA is right now with Nico, with Madden, and with Luke Duncan, the fact that you've got kind of those three lined up in the way that you do, obviously things change so quickly in this sport, as evidenced by UCLA's last 90 to 120 days. But for now, the fact that this program is three deep at quarterback, I think to me really is showing kind of the health and wellness of this program moving forward. And yet again, UCLA finds a way to sort of surge in those transfer portal rankings and really set themselves up very nicely. Will, anything you want to leave with here now that we get out of spring and we're kind of in the quote-unquote off-season, anything that you're going to have your eye on in particular, whether it's a particular position group, an individual player, the coaching staff, things are along the lines of recruiting, things along the lines of NIL, just anything that you're going to kind of keep your eye on as we head into sort of August and mini camp before it all rolls out for real on August 28th against the Utes?
Yeah, it's a great question. The D-line development is everything for this team. I know Deshaun mentioned the offensive line looked great. I still want to see that against Utah week 1. So, let's see how it looks against, actual competition. It's great to look good in practice, but when you're doing it, with 50, 60,000 people in the seats, that'll be the deterrent of whether, you're a good offensive line or not. So those are the two position groups I'm really eyeing. I feel comfortable about the DBs. Chisholm, I forgot he's a redshirt freshman. I mean, he's got a lot of time left here. The Oregon State linebacker transfer. Very excited about him. And John Vaughn's coming back. We mentioned that at the top. That was a very fun linebacking unit. But I think you nailed it, man. That running back room is crowded. And just how Deshaun and Tino will find situationally spots for each one of these running backs to make plays, whether – I feel like Anthony Frias would be a really good running back in the screen game, like a little screen pass to Anthony Frias for how small and shifty he is. Javian's going to be your bell cow, but just adding different guys like this. Carson Cox, he screams goal line running back at that size, 6'1", 190 pounds. That's going to be fascinating to watch me play. So they got a lot of toys and different areas they can go with when it comes to the running back room. So that's going to be a blast to watch how Tino does. But hey, man, I feel like the roster is near complete at this point, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Never say never in the transfer portal era, but just another tip of the cap to Deshaun and, what this team has built in terms of adding from the portal, because very few teams, if any, have added more than UCLA this offseason.
No question, Will. And now, 14 players on defense that have been added in the portal, 10 defensive backs. So a ton of reinforcements has been coming UCLA's way.
Crazy. 10 defensive backs.
Hey, Will, you can never have too many defensive backs. When it rains, it pours in terms of the secondary in Westwood. And Will, I'll sort of close with this. I think you nailed it. Chisholm, John Vaughn's, Anthony Woods. You're talking about, De Villiers. You're talking about Cortland Ford. You're talking about Armella. These 6 guys in so many ways are going to be so critical to what UCLA looks like. Your 2 anchors on the offensive line from a transfer portal perspective. In many ways, your 2 new players from a linebacker standpoint, because you're getting John for the first time in many years, just exclusively focused on football. And then these 2 edges, these mystery edges, and to see sort of what happens there. And these 6, to me, these half a dozen guys, how they approach the weight room, how they approach their reps, how they approach their development over the next 90 days, I think is going to be really critical. So much to be excited about. Thriller, we got some fun things in the hopper here. We got an exciting guest coming our way here in just a day or two. We'll probably have Wayne back in a couple of days, and a lot more exciting things that you and I have kind of cooking over the next couple of weeks that will slowly unveil to the fans in a significant way over the course of the offseason. But fans, thank you so much for all the love and support. As always, you got the Thriller, you got the Madman. Hit that like and subscribe button and follow UCLA LAFB. And as always, fours up forever.